So welcome to everybody who's joining us for the webinar today. I'm just going to give it a couple of, just a minute or two to make sure that everybody's had a chance to get in. There's quite a few of you, which is quite marvellous. And then we'll be starting the session. So thank you for that. Just see. Okay, so welcome to this webinar where we're doing an update discussion of the review of nursing and midwifery practice learning, and hopefully getting some thoughts from all of you who have been able to join us. So that's great. I'm Julie Bliss. I'm a senior nursing education advisor here at the NMC, and I'm going to give a couple of colleagues who've joined me a chance to introduce themselves. Caroline.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Caroline Dobson. I'm the Senior Lead Nurse and Manager for Education QA, and I am supporting this practice learning review with leading on CLOE 3, but obviously supporting the webinar across all of the CLOEs today.
Thanks, Caroline. Chris, do you want to quickly say hello?
Hi, my name is Chris Bell. I'm a Standards Development Specialist here at the NMC, and I'm just lurking in the background.
And Chris is lurking in the background. He's going to be keeping an eye on the Q&A chat for us as well. And I'm delighted that Alex has been able to join us. Alex, do you want to just say hello?
Thank you, Julian. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alex McMahon, and I have the pleasure of being independent chair for this review.
Thanks, Alex. And as you can see, we've got a practice learning review email address if you've got any questions or you have any thoughts after this session. So let's get started with the discussions. So just a little bit of housekeeping. We are going to keep everybody muted because of the numbers. Excuse me. And the chat function is actually turned off. But you can use the Q&A session function that's there. And what we'll do is we will, as I say, Chris is looking at those questions. We may not be able to get to all of them today, for which I'll apologise now. But what we will be doing is using the discussions and any questions that you post to update our frequently asked questions about the review of practice learning, which are available on the website as we take that forward. And we will be adding the webinar to the website after the event. I have to say, though, we're rather hoping that a lot of the discussion and comment will come from yourselves. So thank you for that. The other thing that I would ask, if you could please, is if you could complete the diversity monitoring link that's going into the question and answer chat. We're really keen that we're able to reflect the diversity of the register and the population that people across the 4 countries of the UK are working with to deliver health and care. So we want to be able to keep an eye on that as we go along. So thank you for sharing that information if you are able to. Okay, so just to sort of give some context for the review of practice learning. We know from some work that has been done previously that a quality learning experience, and this in particular, quality practice learning experience, is down to a number of things. That includes the integration of theory and practice, as well as how the practice learning is supported within the practice setting. Some of you might remember that in January 2023, Council approved some changes to the pre-registration nursing and midwifery standards. One was to have up to 600 hours of simulated practice learning for nursing, and then the other was looking at a new standard at the time, looking at leadership and team working with a range of maternity providers for midwifery. There was some question and discussion at the time around practice learning, and Council at that meeting in January 2023 made a commitment to look at practice learning. Whilst the commitment in the Council papers was to look at practice learning hours, it's not possible to think about practice learning solely from the perspective of the hours. It's the practice learning component that's so important. So we're looking at all elements around practice learning, thinking about the education standards which are focused on practice learning. So that might be in the standards framework for nursing and midwifery education, the standards for student supervision and assessment, and the programme standards for nursing, midwifery and nursing associates. Just to note that the proficiencies aren't in scope for this review, but we are looking at practice learning in its entirety in relation to that. So I'd like to start by asking a question of all of you first. That would be really helpful for us, is in relation to what do you associate with high quality practice learning? Now, this is a word cloud, so if you do put in a phrase, can you put it in quotation marks? Otherwise, all the words will be separated. So I'll give you a few moments to think about what it is that you think about when you think of high quality practice learning. Hopefully you'll all be able to respond on the poll on your screen, but if you're not able to, then do put your answers in the chat Q&A box and we'll be able to look at that in relation to that. So the reason we've gone for the word cloud is because we're interested in your thoughts. So hopefully people are able to put things in. Welcome to those of you that may have joined us a little bit late. We're very appreciative of the fact that it can be very difficult to get away from practice or from whatever it is that you're doing in your busy days in relation to that.
Julie, can you see responses on the screen?
I can't. I've just sent Gurinder, who's helping us behind the scenes, a little chat note to say, what I've got, Gurinder, is the question, which I haven't responded to because I don't want to include any bias, but perhaps I should. Caroline, can you see anything on your screen?
No, I could just see the question at the moment, and the same as you, I haven't responded. So I don't know if it's just because I haven't responded that I can't see.
I think it's because you haven't responded, because I did respond and I can see them on the screen.
Right, well, we're going to respond then. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
Although, of course, now I've closed it, I can't see it anyway. But there will be some great words there that you've come up with, and we'll know for the next question. So thank you for that, Chris. IT is great, isn't it? So yeah. So we've asked about high quality. What do you associate with high quality practice learning? So thank you for your comments on that in relation to that. And then we would like to know what do you think the challenges might be? And we've got some key lines of inquiry that we'll go on to talk about, but we wanted to just sort of get these thoughts from you before we go into that in more detail in looking at that. I can see in the Q&A that some people are saying they can't see the responses. It might be because the next question's coming up. So yes, Claire, I think you're right. So the second question is around what do you see as the challenges of high quality practice learning? So I'm sorry to put you on the spot when you said that you'd be looking at the Q&A, keeping an eye on that for us. But as you can see the word cloud, could you just give us an indication of the kinds of things that are coming up for the two questions, please? And next time, Caroline and I will answer the questions. Every day's a school day.
I've done a little test on it, so my response is just test. And the things that I'm seeing coming up around the challenges are things around staffing, capacity, time's a big one in there as well. So quite a lot around the time and the capacity for staffing to support. But then in the previous question, support was a big one as well.
It's really helpful. Thank you, Caroline. Okay, and I can see that some people have answered in the chat, and that's really helpful. Thank you.
I'm sorry, I think it's because, sorry to interrupt it, because the two polls are linked into one block, until you add the responses to both questions and hit submit. So I'm going to, for the later section, see if I can separate the polls so we can see the results.
Thank you, Gorinda.
Okay.
So this is why skill mix is so important, not only in healthcare, but in every other range of life. Okay, so thank you for sharing your thoughts on that. And that's really interesting because we have undertaken some discovery work. So some of you may have heard us talk about this before, but we had independent research undertaken by the Nuffield Trust. We also had the evaluation of simulated practice learning for the 19 universities that did increase to up to 600 hours with those changes from January 23. And also the Education QA team last year asked all the universities to complete a mandatory exceptional reporting form exercise. And so we were able to look at a range of things. And there was a lot of stuff that came out of that. And that included a number of things. So there was something around misinterpretation of the standards and different ways of implementing the standards. Now, at this point, I think it's really important for us to note that the education standards for the nursing, midwifery and nursing associate programs are very much outcome focused. So what we're looking for is that programs are developed in partnership with practice providers and universities, as well as people who use services and students, to prepare students to be fit for the register upon the point of registration. So everybody who qualifies as a nurse or a nursing associate or a midwife will meet the same requirements for registration. How that's delivered, of course, might be done slightly differently. And that's why it's so important that practice partners and universities are working together with the local communities, because what's required in the Isle of Man might be different to what's required in Durham or Dundee or Southwark. So that's really important. So variation is not unreasonable, but there is something about inconsistency and looking at that. The other thing that came out of the discovery work was the importance of the changing context of health and social care. And of course, in England at the moment, there's the work around looking at the professional strategy. We know that in Scotland, they were looking at the nursing task force. So the 4 countries of the UK are working on a whole range of things. Taskification, this idea of thinking about the things that need to be achieved, whether it's a birth, but also that has to be considered within the context of care, or a proficiency from Annex B, which also has to be done using those communication skills from Annex A. And then the other thing was that there was some variation around practice supervisors and practice assessors, and that's quite important for us to explore. Throughout all of that work, we could see that equality, diversity and inclusion was also a challenge, and that might be before, during or after the placements. So there was something around reasonable adjustments, and we're talking about reasonable adjustments under the Disability Act. It might be around biases, discrimination, things like the impact of representation. So if students are seeing staff and colleagues who are doing well, and a whole range of things around that. I think it's important that we acknowledge that, you know, all of the protected characteristics are important here, and thinking about how they will impact on that experience for practice learning. So it might be around ethnicity and disability, but also it might be around socioeconomics. And we understand, you know, there are challenges for all around the cost of living at the moment. We went back to council in January 2025 with some recommendations that came out of this work. And what we have identified are 5 key lines of inquiry. And as you read these, you'll see that they're not necessarily mutually exclusive. So key line of inquiry 1 is looking at the practice learning experiences of students with protected characteristics, including reasonable adjustments, but thinking about the relationship with retention. We're also wanting to explore and are looking at supporting students in practice and the standards for student supervision and assessment and protected learning time for nursing associate students. And also thinking about the quality metrics and quality indicators for practice learning that can be used in part of the education quality assurance work. I think it's really important because one of the things that was a very clear message from the discovery work and from the steering group was the fact that quantity is not necessarily a proxy for quality. And as you can see, those 3 will very much interface with each other. Our 4th key line of inquiry is looking at midwifery curricula and practice learning and how students are supported to achieve their proficiencies. And finally, we're looking at nursing curricula and the practice learning experience and thinking about fields of practice. So we have been doing quite a lot of stakeholder engagement across the 4 countries of the UK. We've met with NHS staff, we've met with social care staff, the Independent Provider Healthcare Network, we're meeting with students, and we've had conversations with members of the public, etc., to see what's coming out of that. And this is another part of that stakeholder engagement. So at this point, I'm going to hand over to Caroline, I think, who will take us forward with the questions. And hopefully we've learned from our previous experience with the word cloud. So thank you, Caroline.
Thank you, Julie. Okay, so like Julie said, the next few slides are going to be focused around the questions, and hopefully we get a lot of input into those. The key areas that we'll be focusing on are the practice learning experiences, specifically around practice supervisors and assessors. A couple of questions that we want to focus on that coming up: practice learning environment, and, like Julie has already mentioned, protected characteristics. So fingers crossed the polls and the word clouds are going to work for you. So the first question is very much around what the model looks like for you, and this very much closely links to Chloe 5 around the attainment of the standards of proficiency, but obviously it does, like Julie has already said, interlink with other key lines of inquiry as well. So do you feel that the current practice learning model allows students to attain their required proficiencies? And this one is a poll, so if you could respond in the poll, and I'll come to Julie to check we're getting responses through.
We are getting responses, Caroline.
Lovely.
So yeah, we've got 152 responses, indeed. So yeah. So what's coming up at the moment is that sort of we've got 58% of people at the moment feel in most cases yes. We've got 30% at some times, and then rarely and not sure covers 7%, and we've got 5% at the top saying yes consistently, and we've got 252 responses on that question at the moment, which is really helpful. So
lovely,
thank you.
And just to say, when we move on to the next question, those polls will remain open. If you just need a bit more time to have to think about what your response wants to be, you can go back into the polls and put your response in there once we've moved on to the next question as well. So it sounds like we've probably got the majority of people to respond to that one. So I'm going to move on to the next question then. And again, this is another poll. And this is around, and this is obviously everybody's perspective will be very different depending on your views of whether you're coming from the student perspective or the practice learning advisor perspective, but it's around how prepared you feel your practice learning providers are to deliver effective learning.
Got 166 responses at the moment, Caroline.
Okay, I'll just give it another minute or so people can respond. Don't forget, if you're struggling, you can pop it into the Q&A as well if you need to, and we will collate all of that after the webinar.
I think the other thing is, if you wanted to add anything else into the Q&A, if you could say, you know, which you know, around preparation or whatever it is, if you wanted to add a comment on why you've given that particular answer. Obviously it's quite difficult with a large group. It's great to have so many of you online. We've got 257 responses at the moment. We can't necessarily come to you all for that discussion, but if there's anything that you want to add to the chat for us to look at, to the Q&A for us to look at afterwards, that would be really helpful. So this one is perhaps a little more evenly divided, Caroline, at the moment. We've got 261 responses, 7% on very prepared, and then we've got 39% have said generally prepared and 45% somewhat prepared. And then the not prepared and not sure accounts for 9% of the responses. So it's really helpful to get people's views on this. Thank you.
Absolutely, and if there's anything you want to add into that Q&A to give a little bit more context to your responses, you know, please do so. Okay, I'm going to move us on to the next question then. So this is a word cloud. Don't forget, if you see something within the word cloud that you feel that you agree with, you can just hover over it and you can like it to bump that up as being more prominent within the word cloud. So this one is, the next couple of questions are very much around the roles of the practice supervisors and assessors. And, you know, it's so important we hear everybody's voices, but especially those who are acting within those roles in practice and supporting students. And we want to hear about all aspects of it. So we don't want just to hear about what is not going so well. We want to hear what is going well. So we make sure we are supporting for that to continue. So this question is for what works well in how practice supervisors and assessors support students. So I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to make your response, and then I'll come across to Julie so she can tell me the highlights of what's going into that word cloud.
We've got 99 responses at the moment, and it's great. Thank you to those of you who are adding things down into the into the. It's really helpful. And somebody's noted that it would be helpful to think about the different organisations involved, so practice learning partners, actual clinical areas, the educators, the assessors. Absolutely, and we are doing some stakeholder engagement with, for example, practice education facilitators, and as I said, students earlier. We know that within this group we've got quite a range of people within various roles, which is really helpful, but it does mean that it's relatively limited as to how focused we can be, but just so that you know, we're not sort of completely disregarding and thinking about that. So that's really important in relation to that.
Are we looking like we've got the majority of people responding, Julie, for this question before I move on?
Yeah, we've got 296 responses at the moment, and thank you for those of you who've remembered to put your quotes around phrases, which is great. So students are coming up as important. It's really interesting actually, because when you look at the word cloud, Caroline, everything seems to be valued about the same. So support for the practice assessor, support and training, protected time, good relationships, communication, clarity and knowledge, role models. So yeah,
And these are definitely, the themes that we're hearing through our stakeholder engagement as well, isn't it? So, it's really reflective as to what we've been hearing as we've been undertaking this review as well. Lovely. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next question then, but don't forget, if you haven't responded, you can do so in your own time. And so this is really to talk about the challenges that practice supervisors and assessors face in supporting practice learning. So if you could, really be open and honest about what those challenges are, that would be really helpful. And again, it's a word cloud, so please pop your responses into there, and we'll have a little discussion as to what we're seeing coming through.
While you're doing that, there's been a comment in the chat about the proficiencies and being different for nursing and midwifery and supporting the achievement of proficiencies. I just do want to confirm for everybody that we have done a number of stakeholder engagement events with people who are, lead midwives for education, various stakeholders around midwifery, as well as around nursing separately. So we're not missing those opportunities to explore that in relation to that.
Julia, what are we seeing on the word cloud regarding challenges?
So the biggest word at the moment is time. And then again, the rest of the words are pretty much on equal. It's changing a little bit, but time comes up a lot. Lack of time, time with students, time to have discussions, time constraints, time to give feedback, engagement from the students. So yeah, we're up at 321 now, which is great.
Fabulous, lovely. Okay. Okay, I'm going to move us on to the next question. I'm conscious of time, and if there's opportunities for us to do any of those Q&As at the end, then it would be great to do those. Okay, again, this is another poll for us to have a look at. And this is around, again, it's bringing back to the challenges and some of the themes that we have seen coming through. And if you could choose one particular challenge, and I'm not going to dwell too much time on this one, what would that challenge be that you have experienced? And I think we probably don't have the poll for this one, so if you could just, there's something you feel really strongly about as something that we want to be recognizing, do just pop that into the Q&A chat for us. If you feel like you've already addressed it in the previous question, then we'll take a look at that information.
It's great, Caroline. There's lots of stuff in the chat that will be really helpful to us, so thank you for that. So yeah.
And are we seeing anything in the chat coming through where regarding this particular question, Julie?
Yeah, it is interesting. Somebody's noted something about the electronic practice assessment document and the challenge of navigating, and that's something that we are trying to gather more information and understanding about, isn't it, Caroline?
Yeah, absolutely, and it's something that we've sent out for further information of within the education QA team as well recently. So absolutely an area that is on our radar, and see if we can do anything to support. Lovely, thank you. Okay, I'm going to move us on to the next question. And again, this is another poll. So when we've been doing our stakeholder engagement sessions, and we've been, out and about and talking to academics and our practice learning partners, we're hearing a lot of talk around that partnership working, and we're hearing some fabulous examples of partnership working, but also some of the challenges that people are facing in delivery across the standards, which is absolutely integral to ensuring that those approved programmes run as they were approved to be run. So this is very much around how you would rate the partnership working that you're experiencing between yourselves as either AEIs or as practice learning partners, and just to get an understanding of what your experiences are. So I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to have a consideration and think about that.
So thank you everybody for responding. So we're up to about 109. Well, I've got 195 responses at the moment, Caroline, climbing as we speak. 20% are saying excellent, 58% good, and 19% adequate. It's a couple of 5% are poor and not sure. But that's really helpful to know. As we were talking about earlier, that partnership between universities and practice is incredibly important to making sure that it's right. And I think it's interesting, and some of the things that are coming up in the Q&A, and I'm going to call it the chat box out of habit. Forgive me, everybody. I know it's not the chat box, but talking about the challenges for universities around the academic staff redundancies and restructuring. And we know, but for those of you in practice, there are challenges around the delivery of care and the amount of work. We know that from the RCN Corridor Care report earlier in the year, and all of the challenges that go away with that, go alongside with that, in relation to that. So we've got 200, just almost 250 responses, Caroline. I would say, as I say, 19% excellent, 56% good, which is great because you know, we appreciate the challenges. And again, I can see from the chat that people think that there may be some differences across nursing and midwifery, which makes sense in some ways.
Absolutely, yeah. And that's really useful to hear as well. So a bit of a spread again across this question regarding experiences of this. Lovely, thank you very much. Okay, so I'm going to move us on to the next question. So as you're aware, when Julie was talking about the different CLOEs that we're looking at, one of the CLOEs is around quality metrics and indicators within practice learning. And so this question is really to understand what factors that you monitor in regards to the quality of the practice learning experience. And again, this is another word cloud one. If you're seeing things in there that the same, just do a thumbs up and like it. So we're bumping it up and seeing it more prominently within that information that's coming through to us.
Some great stuff coming in, Caroline, with the responses. There are some abbreviations that we're not necessarily familiar with. So if you've used an abbreviation, could I ask you to just put it in full in the Q&A, please?
We're all guilty of that, though, aren't we?
We all do it, don't we? Yeah, we all do it. It's not a criticism. I find myself doing it as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So thank you for that.
What sort of things are coming through, Julie? Are you able to?
Yeah, so a lot around student feedback and discussion of from the students, patient feedback, placement evaluation, the confidence in students, so educator feedback, yeah, so placement evaluations in relation to that.
Quite a variety in the factors that are looked at when they're monitoring.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, student feedback is you know, the one that's featuring quite highly, and we've got yeah, and we've got around 318 responses. What we're interested in as well, of course, is how do you get that feedback? What sort of things are you asking about? How do you understand that? And these are questions that we've been asking in a range of our stakeholder engagement as we go forward.
And another question we've been really asking around feedback, just from hearing what people are telling us, is around how do you gather that feedback from the practice supervisors and assessors as well. So it'd be really interesting to see if that's a factor that is in that monitoring of the quality of the practice learning as well, and that's coming through within the factors that are coming on the word cloud. So
thank you to people that are using have put in their what their abbreviations are in full. And somebody said we've used abbreviations on the PowerPoint, which just proves what Caroline was just saying, isn't it? We all do it. So
Line
if there
to
are
it.
if there are abbreviations you weren't sure of, just pop them in the chat, and one of us will
Absolutely.
respond to that. So yeah, that's really interesting.
Lovely. Julie, have we had a lot of responses in? Are we okay to move on to
I think so.
the next question? We've only got a
so.
couple more to go.
Yeah, we've had 417 responses, and of course, you know, you can put in as many words as you like. That's great. But it is interesting. A lot of it is about student, staff and educator feedback, but it's also great to see that the patient feedback is in there as well, and looking at that.
We're seeing a mix of quantitative, qualitative data within that as well.
Yeah, yeah,
right,
yeah,
lovely.
absolutely.
Right, I'm going to move us on to the next question then. And again, another word cloud, which I think is really useful to really hear your voices. And this is around what inclusive practice looks like for you as individuals. I really like this question. I feel it's very personal to your own experience. Really interesting to hear what people's thoughts are around practice learning.
Some really helpful stuff coming in around thinking about student and reasonable adjustments. There's comment about the tripartite approach, thinking about the SLEC, which I think is in England, the Student Learning Environment Charter, something along those lines. And I'm sure that there are there will be similar mechanisms for Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales as well.
And if there are, please do put those in there so we can hear. It's really important that we're hearing across all 4 countries as part of this review. So if there are things that are feeding into that and supporting with that inclusive practice learning within, you know, outside of England, within Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales, do make sure you're adding that into this feedback, because that's really important for us to understand, you know, the broader picture across all 4 countries.
Yeah, it's interesting to see the things that are coming in, thinking about being kind to students and being student-centred in relation to that, and also the comments in the chat. Thank you. So, you know, we appreciate that this is quite high level, and as some of you have commented, that it would be, you know, this will vary from area to area within an organisation for some of these questions, and we appreciate that in relation to that. So thinking about it.
Lovely. Julie, have we had a good number of responses?
Yeah, we're up at about 350.
Fantastic.
So yeah, I mean, it is interesting looking at the comments in the chat, Caroline. Somebody's talked about the and I completely get where you're coming from, and some of these things that you're noting are coming up in our stakeholder engagement across the board, but talking about you know, possibly inflexible attitudes, thinking about our training and experiences. You know, the standards that were published in 2018 and 2019 are very different, for example, for what I trained with in the last century, shall we say, and I think you're right. It's important that we are working to support students with the current standards and thinking about how practice works. So thank you for that. That's really helpful. So we've got just over 380 comments at the moment, Caroline. So the importance of psychological safety, thinking about collaboration with the students, and being person-centred in relation to that. So yeah.
Lovely. Thank you very much for adding that in. Okay, so one more question from me before I hand back to Julie to talk about our next steps. And this is a poll, so hopefully will take a little bit less time for people to complete. So how effectively do current practice learning environments support the diverse needs of students with protected characteristics? And then obviously we are very aware that this again will vary greatly depending on your own experiences across the different organisations, practice learning environments, and also from the different AEIs that are supporting those students in those practice learning environments. But you know, it's important again that we are hearing all the different experiences to feed into the review that we're undertaking. So give you a couple of minutes to have a look at that and have a think about where you feel your experiences sit with that.
So there's been some really helpful comments in the chat, Caroline. Somebody's talked about the need to remove the onus and burden from the student or the learner to create inclusive environments and think about their sense of belonging, and certainly that's, you know, the whole thing around the culture of an area is something that's coming out as a point of interest. I think that reflects healthcare and indeed other organisations at the moment as well. There's a great quote here from David. I don't know if it's yours, David, but I love it. A practice learning environment that supports and celebrates students from every section of society. And of course, that's the population that we are going to be, that students and midwives and nursing associates are going to be providing care for and looking at and taking things forward.
Absolutely.
So
okay.
yeah.
And what are our range of responses looking like on this poll?
So we've got just under 220 responses. Out in front is somewhat effectively, with 56% saying that that's working, 32% not very effectively. So that's sort of the main one. And I think much like somebody's comment earlier about, you know, the practice supervisor and practice assessor experience varying from place to place, I think diverse supporting people with needs will also be dependent on the environment. And thank you for Nicola for noting that. That's certainly something that we've been discussing. For example, in relation to the reasonable adjustments, what might be a reasonable adjustments within the university setting may not work as a reasonable adjustment within the practice learning setting. And we're very mindful of that. And I think that's really important. And certainly where the, thank you, it's nice to see some thumbs up. That's where the importance again of the partnership working comes in order to look at that and to be able to take that forward.
And as with anything, you know, if there's something very you feel is very pertinent that you want to provide a little bit of context to, you know, in regards to if you feel it's not very effective or not at all, then do, you know, pop a brief comment in the chat and we can use that and feed that into the review.
Yeah.
Okay. I am going to hand back over to Julie now to talk about the next steps, but as I mentioned, the polls are remaining open, so if you have had to take a little bit more time to have a think about and reflect on what it is, then please do go back and complete the polls as we go through.
Thank you, Caroline. So yeah, so where we're at the moment, and thank you for all the comments in the chat. We've been doing stakeholder engagement over the summer and are continuing to do some. We've got some more sessions planned next week. But we're very happy to get feedback from anybody, you know, at any time. We've got the community of interest, so if you haven't signed up for that, please do. But we also have the review of practice learning email address that you can send information into, so we'll put that back into the chat in a moment. We're collating all of this information at the moment, and Chris and colleagues are undertaking some what we're describing as desktop research. So we're looking not only at the published literature since the Nuffield Trust report, but also our own education quality assurance work and the things that are coming out of that, and looking at the practice learning approach for other regulators for healthcare and so on in relation to that. We've got the independent steering group and a public and student advisory group. We'll be going to the steering group in 2 or 3 weeks' time with an update of where we're at. And we're on track to go to council on the 26th of November with recommendations for next steps. The papers for council are normally available on the website the week before, so you'll be able to look at them on there on the 19th of November. The next steps could include, we've got 3 options to us in relation to this. So as I've said, we're looking at the practice learning focused education standards. So there might be something around strengthening the practice learning focused education standards that we want to make changes to the standards that we want to recommend. And some of the things that you've been talking about are very common themes that have come out across the work. If a recommendation goes to council and council approves it, that we make some adjustments to the standards. And this is not wholesale adjustments to the standards. We are looking at practice learning. The standards and the proficiencies will be evaluated in due course. But if we do want to make changes to any of the standards and council approves that, then there will need to be a public consultation. So if that happens, there'll be a consultation around February, March, I believe. The other thing that we might want to do in the recommendations is talk about the supporting information and guidance. We've had some fantastic conversations with stakeholders over the last few months with some great examples of where things are working really well. And it may be about sharing case studies of best practice, etc., looking at that. And the other thing that we may well identify, and we were very clear about this when we went to council in January, that actually some of the things that come out of this may not be within the gift of the regulator, as the Nursing and Midwifery Council as the regulator, but might be things for other stakeholders to think about and how to take steps and looking at that in relation to that. So yeah, and actually that coincides with the post that's just been put in the chat about the range of factors that are impacting on equal opportunities for practice learning. As we said earlier, it's not just about disability, but cost of living, etc., and that does fit in there in relation to that. So those are the things that we will be looking to take forward in relation to that. So yeah. So thank you for that. We've got about 10 minutes, and I'm just wondering if there are any questions that people would like to put to us. There's some great stuff in the chat about supporting students, the social care practice learning environments, the placement strategy that came out earlier this year has been incredibly helpful in relation to that. So yeah, we do realise that this has been quite generic. So if you want to come back with more detailed information, then do in relation to that, please. Chris, I think you've got some questions from the chat, haven't you, that we can look at?
Yeah, there have been some questions coming in that we'll see how many of these we can rattle through in the next 10 minutes or so. But to start off with, should we be looking at mandating minimum requirements to be a practice assessor and minimum requirements for what practice assessor training should be, thereby providing standardisation in practice assessor preparation?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's something that's come up in a number of the conversations that we've had around looking at that. At the moment, the standards talk about the need for preparation, and that may be one of the things that we look at strengthening. So we're looking at a whole range of things in relation to that. But it's a strong message, and I've seen it in the Q&A session as well in relation to that. And we've noticed the support from you with your reactions. So thank you for that. Chris, do you want to add anything to that? Because Chris is the standards development specialist who's been working with the team on Key Line of Inquiry 2, which is looking at the standards for student supervision and assessment. And just to say that we have also spoken with a couple of universities about the academic assessor role, and I know there were some comments earlier about that. So we're looking at the standards for student supervision and assessment in their entirety within this work. Christy, do you want to add anything?
No, only to kind of reiterate what you said. It is a message that's been coming through quite a lot, that there is a great deal of variation for all the roles, but it seems particularly for practice assessors that there does appear to be a great deal of variation. In some places it's sort of like several days of in-person training that people get before they go into these roles. In other locations it may just be as little as 1 to 3 hours online training before they go into these roles. Clearly it is to try and find some sort of like sweet spot somewhere in the middle. Places where they sort of like say, well, we have compulsory 1-day in-person training courses and regular compulsory 1-day face-to-face refresher training and update training. They say, well, we do that and it works really well, and we don't really seem to be having the sorts of problems that you're hearing about from elsewhere. So whether it's necessarily within our powers to mandate training and content of training and how often it should be done, we would have to look at, because that's obviously very much in the power of universities and employers, and we don't necessarily regulate them, but it'll be a case of seeing what we can do to maybe encourage it.
Yeah, thanks, Chris.
Okay.
And somebody's noted in the chat about the work that NHSE are doing, looking at a framework for supporting the standards for student supervision and assessment. That is some work ongoing, and we have been involved in some of that work. We've also been in discussion with the devolved nations as well, because of course the standards are for the 4 countries of the UK. So thank you for that. If you can hear the dog, I'm sorry. The postman's just come. Hopefully I'll stop in a minute. Chris,
Yeah,
were there other questions?
Oh yeah, no worries. The next one, it's kind of a cross between a statement and a question really, but we may have a comment on it. And it's really about highlighting that there can be clear differences between how universities and how trusts approach things with regards to maybe instance in practice, failing students appropriately, but being allowed, but universities very much want to allow them to continue, and whether anything can be done to try and address that sort of like that tension, that dichotomy at times between the approach of the university and the approach of the placement. So
Yeah.
I'd be interested with any views on that.
Yeah. Thanks, Chris. I think it is difficult, and of course the standards are generally outcome focused, and I see some people have been adding in the chat what I was about to say was it's about finding that balance, isn't it? And that's where these discussions with people like yourselves are really helpful, because we want people to be able to be innovative and working within the standards, but we don't want it to become overly burdensome. And how we look at that. So it's really important that we look at all of the stuff that's coming out. And there's a comment about, yes, it's important to have quality training, but we don't want to make it more difficult with capacity and support. So it's a fine line really in relation to that. But we are open to listening to everything and anything in the way that we take it forward. So yeah, and of course the other thing is that there is work ongoing that has now started to look at the review of the code and also the review of revalidation, and inevitably those pieces of work will also link back to the practice learning review. So some of the things that are coming out of our discussions with stakeholders, we're able to feed into those streams of work as well in relation to that. So that's been incredibly helpful. So thank you.
Okay. Next one, which is possibly influenced by the number of people who responded to the question about how do you get your feedback for rating quality of placements, and so many people said student feedback, but there is again a mixture of a comment and a question about students do suffer from feedback fatigue, survey fatigue. How do we encourage student engagement with surveys? Because some people say that they typically find poor response rates, which can therefore be difficult to extrapolate actions from. So again, maybe a broader question than just an NMC question about how do we encourage student engagement with surveys?
Yeah. Yeah, and if we had the answer to that, wouldn't it be marvellous? You can see Caroline smiling from EdQA. So yeah, so there's been some really helpful comments. Thank you, and the discussion. I appreciate that it may not have been as nuanced as you might have liked, but thank you to Gurinder, who's put the Practice Learning Review email address in. That's been incredibly helpful. It would be really helpful for us if you could just rate how you thought the poll went today, and thank you for your patience with us at the beginning as we worked through our teething problems with the poll and the word chat. I hope it's been helpful for you to understand where we're at and what we're doing. It's certainly been incredibly helpful for us, and we will be going through all your comments in the Q&A chat box in relation to that as well. So thank you. I'd like to say thank you to Caroline and Chris and Gurinder for helping us with that. And Alex, thank you for joining us. I think it's helpful for you to be able to see what the discussions are that are being had and how it's going on. So that's brilliant. Thank you very much. If there is anything that you want to share with us, then please do email it through to the Practice Learning Review email address, and we can have a look at that as well, and come back to you if we need more information. So thank you very much for your patience. Thank you for giving up your lunchtime if you did. Hope you managed to have some lunch despite everything. And thank you very much. So I think that's us done. Thank you for your patience, and